Cafe, and it is that every other Sunday where we have the worldwide story round in conjunction with the amazing Get a Word in Edgeways. And our host tonight, our MC, our general keeping of order is the incredible Mike Russ. Mike, over to you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Good evening, everybody. And John, you get yourself back in the warm, and we'll see you back in a few minutes' time, okay? But get yourself turned up.
Okay, I'll see you back up there. Okay, see you then, mate. Bye.
Right, he's been travelling back for a gig he was doing as Father Christmas, and he's in a motorway service station in a cold car. So we're sending him off home. He's about 20 minutes away from his home. So he didn't traffic in the UK. We all know what that's like. So here we are again. It's halfway through November. It's because the way the Saturdays turn this year, I think we're only 4 or 5 Saturdays away from Christmas and everything. So here we go. So in 2 weeks' time, I think we're around the beginning of December. So we can look into do some Christmas stories through December and stuff like that, or whichever religion you are, we could do some of those stories as well. So we've got Diana coming in and we got Mike coming in, so we'll wait for them to catch up. Then I'm actually going to break a rule I normally have, because if I can actually sit here and not have to tell stories, then I'm happy, because I just do the MC, get all the glory and everything else, and listen to all your stories. But Amy, who I have trouble, Kath, saying no to sometimes, I must admit, phoned me up and she said she's going for a new job. So I'll let you into a secret. There's a job come up a bit further south than we are, which pays quite well. And she needed a story to do where the trees are talking or the trees are moving and stuff like that. And so she phoned me up, and you know what it's like in mobile phones nowadays and everything else. She sat there having a cup of tea and the phone goes and the voice goes, "Do you know any stories about the trees talk?" And you go, "Well, maybe I do. I can't quite remember." She goes, "Well, phone me back in 5 minutes." Anyway, so I did have a long think about it. And this one came to mind. So I'm going to tell this one. And then we're going to go to Keith. And then it's Keith to Kath, Kath to Janet, Janet to Baba. Janet, are you doing stuff today? You're going to do something? You're muted, so I can't hear you.
Yes. Yes.
Right, a thumb up would have done. That's fine. So we'll go me to Keith, Keith to Kath, Kath to Janet, Janet to Baba, and we'll make it up from then as we go on. But Baba, I know that you want to do a story. You always want to do a story. David, it's nice to see you again. You haven't been here for a while. And Phil, if you've just come in, hello. Mike, I know you're there. Yeah, okay, so we'll talk about this one. Because there was a mum and a little girl. And the mum was a middle-aged mum, a 30-something mum, something along those lines. But the little girl, she was about 4 years old. And when you go into the Forest of Dean, now, for those of you who don't know where the Forest of Dean is a bit of forest between 2 rivers. There's the River Severn and it's the River Wye, and it's about 200 square miles. It's been there since the year dot, and it's sometimes they say about the Dean, it's where this world meets the other world. And there's gaps in the Dean. You can still, even with all the modern technology, GPS and everything else, you can still get lost in the Forest of Dean. Now, when I used to work there for the forestry people, we used to have a front-wheel drive little van called an escort van, a Ford escort van. This is back in the 70s and the beginning of the 80s. And I got stuck down there one day and I couldn't get it out. And I had to go and get one of the tractor drivers that worked for our company and come and pull me out. And I thought that was the end of it. No one would mention that. So I was down there about 5 years ago and I was in a pub talking to some of the guys. I collected all the stories for them and everything else. And they said, well, you turn right, turn left, you go down past where Mike got stuck, then you turn left again. I goes, what do you mean where Mike got stuck? And he goes, yeah, well, you got stuck down there in your van. I said, that was 25 years ago. And they went, yes, but we know exactly where it was. And so there's a bit of the Forest of Dean. It's a bit of a little lane, and it goes where Mike got stuck. That's what they call that bit of the lane. But it wasn't there, it was somewhere else. In the Dean. Now, back in the day, you'd have a little narrow carriage and two horses, but the horses wouldn't be side by side, they'd be in tandem. So you'd have a front horse and a back horse, and then a narrow little carriage with normally only sat one person, and then a little sort of seat for two more people, or maybe one person. But that meant you could get right round the narrow paths. You didn't have to stick to the wide. The paths and the roads in forests are called rides sometimes. So even the narrowest of rides, you could get this horse down. Because it was one horse in front of the other horse, that would be how it would work. And she was just trotting along here, just quietly going along. And she came round the corner, and a hind came out of the woods. And it startled the ponies. And they jumped backwards and they jumped forwards. And as they jumped forwards, the first one got the bit in its mouth. And it took off at full speed. Now, the second one had to go with it. And the mother, she fell backwards because it was such a sort of jerk. And she came forward again. And just then, the little girl, she fell off the carriage and she hit an ash tree and landed at the bottom of it. And away this carriage went. Now, by the time the mother had sorted herself out, they were 100, 200 yards down the road. She was standing and screaming and pulling on the reins and everything else. But this pony got the bit between its mouth and it was straining, and a battle ensued. And finally, either she managed to pull so hard that the bit came back into its mouth, or the pony ran out of steam and had to stop anyway because it just couldn't run any further than that. But whatever happened, the horse is stopped. But the mother, she was frantic by then. A little girl had fallen off. And she turned the horses round as quick as she could, and she went straight back. And there, underneath this ash tree, was a little girl crying her eyes out. She was about 4 years old, and she'd broken her arm. As she'd hit the tree, she'd broken her left arm, and she was holding like that, right in the middle of the forest, sat underneath this ash tree. Well, you can imagine what the mother thought, and you can imagine what she said to the horses. She was not happy with the horses, whichever way you looked at it. But she scooped the baby up. She got 2 bits of wood, which is what they did those days, wrapped her around the arm and with her some bit from the bottom of her dress, and off she went to the doctor. And as she went to the doctor, she had to go through the village, where she stopped just for a second and said, "Go and get my husband, he's a miner." Now, the Dean miners, they dug coal sometimes, but they dug all sorts of stuff down there. And they were good people. But he was still underground. So they sent a message to him. Your wife's been what we call an RTA now, a road traffic accident. There'd been an accident. The little baby had fallen off, the little girl had fallen off. He came straight out, went round to the doctors. And in them days, it's before the NHS, you had to pay the doctors. So he took the money with him and they sat down there, and the doctors did everything they did. They put her in a plaster and everything else. And off they went back to their little cottage. And their little cottage was called Five Ashes Cottage, because at the back, there was a grove of 5 ashes. Now, when you get a little grove of ashes in the forest, they tend to be like a clump. It's not in a circle, they're just like 5 of them, but there would be normally a birch or a rowan tree or something there as well, and that makes it a glade. And that's where his cottage was next door. Now, it happened to be his dad's cottage and his father's cottage before his time, but that's what they called the cottage, Five Ashes Cottage. And those 5 ashes were at the back of his cottage. Well, that night, he went up, the little girl was tossing and turning, but what they were worried about, because there weren't x-rays or anything like that, was internal bleeding or infections and things like that. So he sat there by her bed all night, just to check that his only daughter was fine. His mother, she settled down with a cup of tea and probably a slug of gin. She'd gone to sleep, but he sat there all night. Just as the sun came up, his little girl woke up. It was the first time she'd pretty much woken up. And she looked and she said these words, Dad, she said. He said, are you okay? She said, yes, I am my arm. And she says, where's little Teddy? And he said, little Teddy? He said, yes, I had little Teddy with me. Where's little Teddy? Well, little Teddy was his little dog, was her little dog. That's what she called a little old teddy bear that she left. He said, I don't know, we'll go and find him, but you just go back to sleep. And again, she burst into tears. She said, little Teddy's in the forest all by himself. I'd have to go and find him. You have to go where the accident was and see if he's there. Because when I was on the carriage, I was holding little Teddy. Don't worry about it, he said. I'll sort it out. Just stay here. I'll go and get some more hot water in the hot water bottle. You just stay here. So by the time he sorted all that out, the sun had come up and he went out through his back door. And there, by the side of the back door, was little Teddy. Someone had seen it, heard of what had happened, and brought it down, but they hadn't brought it to the front of the cottage. They brought it to the back of the cottage. And he said, oh, aren't people nice? Someone must have seen what had happened, known how important it was. They must have had family themselves. They haven't left and told me who it was, but someone will say to me at some point who it was. Then I'll know, and I can buy him a pint and I can say thank you. I can write him a note or something like that. So he picked up little Teddy and he went back and said, here's little Teddy. And he gave it to his daughter. And she smiled and turned over with the new hot water in the hot water bottles and went back to sleep. And she seemed okay. She didn't have a temperature or anything. So he went back downstairs and he made himself a cup of tea and he went and sat outside the back of his cottage. And he looked at the back there. And like I said, his cottage was called Five Ashes Cottage. But he didn't realise it at the time. In fact, it took him a couple of weeks to remember what he'd seen that day. Because nobody ever came and told him that they'd picked up that little Teddy and brought it round to his cottage. He was waited and waited and waited, but no one came. No one even mentioned it in the pubs. No one said, oh, it was my kids. I think there was a complete silence. And when he got to think about it, about 2 or 3 weeks later, he looked at the back of his cottage and there were the 5 ashes there. And suddenly he realised the day that all this had happened, that the back of his cottage, there hadn't been 5 there, there'd been 6. There'd been an extra tree there. And he thought about it and he thought about it and he thought about it. Now, like I said, the Forest of Dean is 200 square miles of trees. That's why they call it a forest. And you can't remember every tree. But if you work in the forest, we all have our favourite trees and we all recognise the odd tree here and there. And we all have trees. And I don't care what they look like and what the size of them are and everything else. Everybody's got 1 or 2 trees that got a name. So he took his wife and his little girl back about a month later. And they took him to the place where the accident was. And there was an ash tree. And he recognised it. He recognised that ash tree. But when he last seen it, it had been in the back of his cottage and not where it was now, which was about 3 miles away. And he went up to the tree and he said, thank you. Little Teddy came back home. And when the guy told me this story, nearly 40 odd years ago, in a pub in the Forest of Dean, there was a great big forester. He had tattoos on his arms and he had a wife and children and grandchildren and everything else. And he said, Mike, he said, tell the story whenever you like. Call me a bloody liar if you want to. Few people call me a bloody liar, but I'll take you to the tree. And if you think we're fools, we're fine. But a couple of weeks later, we happened to be in that part of the forest and we stopped. And he showed me his tree. And it's an ash tree by the side of a little lane or a ride or a path or just by the side of a glade, right in the depths and the deeps of the forest. And we were both standing there looking at an ash tree. Like I said, call him a liar if you want to. He was too big a lad for me to call a liar. But you know something? I happen to believe him. Right. So Amy's got a story to take back to the Forest of Dean. I've got a story that I got from a fellow called Edgar nearly 40 odd years ago. And so the batting order is going to be Keith, Kath, Janet, Baba, and we'll make it up from there. So I'm going to send you over to Keith from Lincolnshire. And that's a funny picture for Lincolnshire, Keith, got us from behind you, because that's got hills on. Lincolnshire is as flat as a bloody pancake.
Lincolnshire's not flat as a pancake. I live in the middle of the Lincolnshire Wolds, rolling chalk hills. They go down the centre of Lincolnshire with fens and marsh on either side. They disappear into the Humber and then come up again in the Yorkshire, in Yorkshire as Yorkshire Wolds. They're not very high, granted, but they are rolling hills.
Yeah, Keith, only people in Lincolnshire call those little hummocks hills. Nobody else calls those hummocks anything but hummocks. But you in Lincolnshire call them hills, all right? I've seen mole hills bigger than them.
Yeah, little hills, they're little hills, Lincolnshire Wolds. And I bike up and down them a lot of the time as well, so I know that they're there. Yeah, rolling hills, beautiful countryside. Anyway, I told this story a few weeks ago in Rock the Casbah, and so if anybody was there, then you can see if I've improved on this story. I'm working through these Viking stories, and I'm coming to the end of them now, so that for my practice run. So, here's the one that I want to tell you tonight. Thor, famous for thunder and the hammer, was asleep, but he woke up one morning and he reached out under his cloud pillow, reaching for his hammer, and it wasn't there. "Where's my hammer?" he cried out, and woke his wife and his children. And they looked all the way around the cloud cottage and around the clouds and everything. They couldn't find the hammer anywhere. And he thought to himself, "Who's stolen my hammer? I bet it's Loki, because I know that I tricked him a few months ago and he's not really very friendly at the moment." So he went over to Loki's dwelling, to his house, and went in. "Loki, you've stolen my hammer. Who's stolen my hammer? Have you?" And Loki said, no, it wasn't me. No, couldn't have been me, no. Perhaps it was one of the giants. Perhaps it's one of the giants that's stolen it. I'm willing to go and investigate if you want. And so Thor agreed. But Loki said, "Well, I need to borrow the cloak of feathers, the falcon cloak, from the palace, from Freya." And so they went to see Freya, said, "Can I borrow your cloak of feathers? Because Thor needs to get his hammer back." Well, she readily agreed, because that was very important hammer that Thor had, because with it he used to defend Asgard. And without it, well, what was it going to do? What is it going to be under threat? And they could hear some thunder in the distance. And they thought, well, this must be the hammer being used by one of the giants in Utgard. And so Loki, he put on his cloak of feathers and he flew off over Midgard into to Utgard. And there he searched around, and he was just trying to be very obscure, but he found eventually, he found Thrym, one of the giants. And he was playing with his dog and his cat. They were big as elephants and big animals, because he was a giant. And Loki said, "I hear that you have stolen Thor's hammer." And Thrym said, "Yes, I've stolen it, and I'm going to keep it. And maybe I'll use it sometime and maybe attack Asgard. But for the moment, it's hidden 12 leagues below the sea in some caves. And I will not release it, will not let it go until you can arrange for me to marry Freya." "Marry Freya?" said Loki. "She's the most beautiful person in Asgard." "That's the deal," said Thrym. And so Loki had no option, but he flew back to Asgard and told he told Thor the terms of return of the hammer, and they said, well, will Freya agree to this? And they went to see Freya and said that she was to marry in 8 days' time, to marry Thrym the giant. Oh, no, she said, I cannot do that. No, I cannot marry that ugly beast, no. And she pleaded with her father, Odin. I can't marry that. No. But there was a wise guard. Himdall. He had golden teeth and golden hair. He was very wise, and he made a suggestion. He said, let's dress up Thor as Freya. Let's dress him up as a bride, and then take him over to Utgard, and there, under pretense of a bride, he can retrieve his hammer. And Thor said, me, dress up as a girl? No, I can't do that. Have you any better ideas? Said Loki. Well, they hadn't. And so the daughters of Odin had great fun in dressing Thor in all this beautiful, they took one of the dresses of Freya and they let it out, and so it would fit him because it's obviously a lot bigger, and covered his arms and hands with lace, and a shawl over his shoulder, and a covering for his head, and a veil across his mouth. They curled his golden hairs with tongs, and put on special boots on his feet so it would hide his big feet. And then Loki said, I will volunteer to be your handmaiden. And he was dressed as a girl. And they set off for Utgard in Thor's chariot, drawn by 2 shaggy goats with golden hooves. And they flew across Midgard into Utgard. And there, when they were approaching Utgard, they heard this thunder and this sound. And Thyma could hear the approach of his bride. And he sent out 5 kings to welcome them in. There was king of gold and silver and iron and bronze and tin. And they brought them to the king, brought them to the person who was going to be married to Thor, who was disguised as Freya. And so they set out a big banquet prior to the wedding. There was a big table with lots of food on it. There was great pieces of beef and lamb and all kinds of sweetmeats, all kinds of puddings, all kinds of things. And so all the giants and them was there eating some of this wonderful food. And beside him, there was Thor dressed as Freya, but on his side there's only sort of small sweetmeats and bits and pieces, because the females of the clan didn't eat very much. But this annoyed Thor, because he was getting very hungry after all this time. And he reached out and took a great lump of beef and ate it down. And then there was tankards of ale, and he swallowed those down as well. And Thyma said, well, my future wife, she's eating so much. I mean, what's happening here? But Loki chimed up and said, well, your future bride has been so hungry for these last 8 days. She's been looking so forward to getting married to him. She's just getting so hungry. And so that satisfied Simon. He settled down and he thought, oh. And he reached over to kiss his bride. And he moved the veil just slightly. from the face of Thor. But he looked into Thor's eyes and saw these big red eyes and said, wow, my bride has got such fearful eyes. And again, Loki chimed up and said, oh, well, your future bride has been waiting 8 days. She couldn't sleep. She's been looking forward to marrying you. And that settled down Simon. He said, right, bring forth Thor's hammer. That's going to be the bridal gift. And so a servant came struggling along with a hammer on a velvet pad and a velvet plate, and brought it, and was about to put it on the bride's lap, because that was the custom, that you put the bridal gift on the bride's lap. But as he was doing so, Thor, he threw back his veil and he reached out and grabbed the hammer. And with a great thrust, he banged it down onto the giant's head and killed him. And with a second thrust, he killed all the other giants in the court. And with a third thrust, he destroyed the fortress of Utgard. And so Thor and Loki, they threw off their female garments or their dresses and veils, and they flew back on the chariot to Asgard. And when they were back there, Thor said, now nobody is going to refer back to this masquerade. Nobody's going to laugh at what happened there. And Loki, he stifled his snigger and tried not to laugh, because you don't laugh at somebody who's got a big hammer.
Thank you very much, Keith. That's lovely. That's great. So we're going to go to Kath now. Kath, I've been walking around Much Wenlock all afternoon with someone that looks like you.
It's funny, that's such a coincidence, Mike, because I was walking around Much Wenlock with somebody who looked like you.
I
Isn't
know.
that amazing?
Well, wasn't it a lovely afternoon? And we had a couple of little dogs, one of which was a puppy,
Beautiful.
and it was just lovely. And did you get a photograph of Clover?
I didn't. No, I
No, I
didn't.
didn't.
Oh, she's a little beauty.
Lynn, my wife, is going, why didn't you take a photograph of the little puppy? And we'll have to do it next time we met. A 12-week-old little sort of Shropshire Bitzer, she is. That's what she is. Anyway, Kath, are you still in your cupboard?
Yeah, I of course, Mike. As you know, I spend my life in my cupboard, locked in.
Yeah. Okay, so Kath from the cupboard, I'll over to you.
Thank you. Thanks for your story, Keith. That was a great story. There was a king, and one morning he woke up and something was wrong. His throat felt so dry and raspy, and his tongue, it was like leather. Well, he went into the throne room and he called all the courtiers and he called the doctor. And he told the palace doctor what was wrong, that the inside of his throat felt like it was sticking to itself. He said, look at my tongue. And the doctor, he knew what to do. He could see the king's tongue and throat needed lubrication. And so he scurried off to his chamber in the palace, and he came back with a little bottle of the finest oil. And he gave that to the king to drink. And the king did indeed drink it, and he said, it's made it even worse. My throat is now sticking to itself and even more sticky, and my tongue, it's like greasy leather. Well, of course, the palace doctor knew what to do. And so he sent to the palace kitchens for that thing he needed. And one of the courtiers came back bearing a little jar of pickles. And the doctor fed the king with pickled gherkins until the king couldn't take any more. His throat was burning with the acid. His mouth felt hot and there were tears leaking from his eyes. And the king said, "Do you know, I think I might just be thirsty." Well, the doctor looked at the courtiers and the courtiers looked at the doctor. But of course you don't argue with a king, even though everybody knew that being thirsty doesn't make your eyes water. And so 2 of the courtiers went off and one came back with syrupy rose water that he fed to the king. And the other came back with a glass of thick, syrupy wine, and he gave that to the king, and the king drank them both. And he still didn't feel any better. In fact, now he was starting to feel quite ill and queasy. While all this had been going on, standing at the door to the throne room, there was the old woman whose job it was to clean the palace, and she'd been leaning on her broom, watching all the toing and froing. And she said, "Why don't you try giving him some water?" And there was a shocked silence. A silence that became so profound it was as if it would never be broken. But finally the king spoke up. He said, "My good woman, do you not realize that I am a king? I have ailments that are obscure and complex and regal. How could such an ailment possibly be cured by plain water? Throw her out." And several of the courtiers hurried to do exactly as the king had instructed. And so the old woman lost her job cleaning the palace, and the king, well, he retained his obscure, sophisticated and regal ailment. Thank you very much.
Lovely, Kath. Absolutely lovely. Well done, well done, well done. So, Janet, we'll come to you. After Janet, we're going to Baba, and then from Baba, we're going to Dave. Okay?
I'd like to bring you a story that apparently comes from Germany. I was told this by a long time ago by a German friend. I find it very unsettling. And a little while ago, I decided that I was never going to tell it again. And then I thought, let's just give it another go and see who else I can unsettle. And then you can complain to me and tell me how you feel about it. Or you can say you enjoyed it and it should be left exactly as I heard it. There were a couple young and about to be married. They were so delighted because on their marriage, they would inherit the small farm. And so on their wedding day, the bride stood in the doorway of the church in her best dark blue dress, with her dark hair hanging down her back, and her breast white but slightly flushed. She was excited. And beside her stood her husband-to-be, and there he was, a big, broad-shouldered man with those big hands that only farmers can boast of. He had that golden curly hair and the flushed cheeks of sunshine. And they were happy. And they were married. He carried her over the threshold into the small cottage that she'd cleaned out. She hung fresh gingham curtains. He'd made a wooden settle that went by the door. Life was good. It was very good. So good that his cows They had straight backs and they gave the best milk in the district. And the sheep gave the finest wool, the longest staple. Beautiful. The eggs from her hens had golden yolks. And the strawberries, those Erdbeer, they were almost as big as plums. They were rich and they were red. She never failed to sell every last piece of fruit at market. And for a year, maybe 2, in fact, 3, life was good. They would sit together in the evening and smile and sing and probably tell stories. They were happy. But the drought came. The drought dried the grass. The sheep became lank-legged, and the staple short and the wool rough. The cows on their straight back, they got those lumps, the warble fly, where you could only have to squeeze them to pop out. It's such hard work, and they withered. Was not good. Strawberries, well, they grow in dry weather. But they don't swell, and they're not sweet, and they're hard, and they're bitter. And the hens went off lay, not even golden yolks. Life was difficult. But still they worked hard. They tried. They tried the first year of the drought. Second year of the drought was worse. The third year came and it rained. It rained, and they were standing in the porch with their faces up there, looking at the sky as the rain fell upon them. And it rained, and it rained, and it rained. And the strawberries grew but became rotten and soggy, and the sheep got foot rot. Maybe next year, but it rained and it rained. The weather became cold. They sat in the fireplace and they were not happy. It was a dull, damp, unloving household. And the husband decided he wanted to go somewhere. He wanted to go somewhere brighter. He wanted to go somewhere where it was warm and cheerful. And so he went where he could find company. He went to the tavern and he drank that good, rich, dark brown German beer. The beer that makes you smile, the beer that makes you sing, the beer that makes you roll home. But when he rolled home, the company wasn't good. His wife was lonely. Her heart was hardened against him. She didn't smile much. She didn't cuddle much. And he tossed his head and he sat on the settle separate from her. I'd like to say that things improved, but they did not improve. They just went from bad to worse. He spent more time in the inn. She spent more time alone, and they grew apart. The only thing that gave the wife any pleasure at all, the birds up on the beams. For in the cottages in Germany, as in many European countries, the beams, there's an opening. The birds can fly in and out. If this happens, it's considered to be good luck. And the birds were still coming. Were they? Well, a few. The Schalbe, the swallows came. The pigeons came. But it was a very sad household. He shouted at her, "Stinkende Kuh, smelly old cow. Hässliche alte Frau." Ugly old woman. And she withdrew and she was cold. And she would look up at the birds and she would wish for freedom like the birds had. One day, she decided she had to do something about it, but she was afraid to go. But he came back that night. He came back absolute, there's only one word for it, steaming drunk. So drunk that she feared. She feared, and she was right to fear, for he raised his hand and he smacked it against the table, and she stood back. She stood back as she was afraid. She was so afraid that she turned away, and she saw him reach down for his axe, and she was even more afraid, and so she ran. But as she ran, she fell against the table and she cowered down on the floor, and she prayed to those gods to release her from this dreadful, dreadful life. Not a life that was her fault, not a life that it was his fault, a life that had gone sour, a life from which she longed to be free. And as he picked up an axe and shouted, "Ich hasse dich," he threw it at her. And at that very moment, the gods must have heard her, because she raised her wings, her wings into the sky. But the axe, as she flew through the opening, just caught her tail. And to this day, you will notice that the swallows have a V shape in their tail. And that is how it happened. And when they leave in the summer to go somewhere warm, where they can be happy, you'll perhaps remember this story. I truly wish that I could say she was happy as a swallow. I truly wish that I could say that he found happiness somewhere on his farm when the sun shone again. But I was never told the end of the tale. Maybe somewhere in your head and your heart, you'll make a happy ending for them. But just smile when you see the swallow, because the swallow represents freedom. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. That's lovely. That's absolutely. I've often wondered where the little swallows got their V-neck net tails from. Right, so we said, Baba, over to you next. And from Baba, we're going to David. David, are you going to tell a story tonight? Where have you gone? Yes, I can see you there. Yes, great. Okay, you're going after Baba, David. Okay. And then from David, we're going to probably Norman. We'll see where we are. Okay. But anyway, Baba, over to you.
Now, first of all, well told to everyone, well told. And remember, a tale well told is a tale worth retelling. All right. So ordinarily, I would begin this session, especially since I learned how to recalibrate my mic, with a very long, long time ago. However, out of curiosity, I did a little research about the story I'm about to tell. And I found out that this story has versions literally all around the globe, to the indigenous people, to the Americas, to the Norse, to the southeastern people of Nigeria. See what I did there? From the Norse to the southeastern people of Nigeria, the Romans, the Greeks. This story has been all around the world. So I'm telling a slightly different version of this story. And this is the story about why the sun and the moon live in the sky. Now, you see, a long time ago, the sun and the moon, they lived on the earth with the first people. This is before the coming of man. And the sun and the moon, they lived on the earth and they were doing rather well. They had a nice compound. They had a nice home with property and servants, and they lived well. But Moon always wanted more. She heard that one of her neighbors had built a larger compound, had an even larger house. So she told her husband, I want a larger compound. I want a larger house. I want more land. And being the dutiful and loving husband that he was, he acquired more land and built a bigger compound, built a bigger house. Moon was happy for a moment, but then she heard that another neighbor had built an even bigger house, an even bigger compound with even more land. So she went to her husband and said, Are we not the finest people in this land? Do we not deserve to have the best and the biggest of everything? I want more land. You must build a bigger house, a bigger compound. And son, being the loving, dutiful husband that he was, acquired more land, built a bigger compound, and built an even bigger house. In fact, some people say the house was so big that the east wing and the west wing were in different time zones. Now, happy that she now obviously had the biggest house, Moon wanted to throw a party. And she said to her husband, we must throw a party. It must be the biggest, most glorious party that's ever been. And you guessed it. Son, being the loving and dutiful husband that he was, hired extra servants, hired every caterer in the area, and prepared to throw the biggest party that had ever been thrown. Now, you notice I said party and not party. A party is something you go to. A party is what you are. So, Moon sent out invitations. She sent out invitations to the east, to the west, to the north, to the south. She sent out invitations to everybody and everybody she could think of. And everybody responded, including the elephant, the great apes, the great cats, that's the jaguar, the tiger, the lion, the cheetah, who doesn't, and also the panther and the lesser cats. And they sent out invitations to the wolves and the dingoes and the wildcat, the wild dog, the foxes and the coyote and the lesser canine, i.e. dogs. They sent invitations to everyone. The monkeys came, the elephants came, oh, you name it, they came. And the house was huge, humongous. It had its own weather system, its own climate. And people were coming left and right. But someone had not RSVP. Just a little respect for me. Oh, no, that's another story. And Moon was very upset. She said, husband, my husband, water has not accepted our invitation. What is the problem? Well, I don't know, my love. I mean, he's water. Well, you must go down to the water's edge and find out if he's coming to this party, because this is the party of parties. Party. And you guessed it, being the loving, caring, dutiful husband that he was, he walked down to water's edge and he leaned in the water and said, and for those that don't speak Waterese, he said, dear brother Water, my wife is very concerned. You have not RSVEP. No, that's a little respect to me. No, that's another story. You have not responded. Are you not coming to the party? I've hired caterers and servants and every imaginable type of food, but only you have not responded. And Water said, Water said, well, my dear friend, son, I would love to attend your party, but I have quite an entourage, and I'm not sure your house is big enough to accommodate me, my kin, and my entourage. He said, oh, brother Water, you must come. If you don't come, I'll never hear the end of it. And I love my wife dearly. You must come. He said, but are you sure your house is big enough? He says, when you come, ask my wife that question. He said, okay, I will gather my people and I will attend the party. And so son went back and he said, oh, my love, dear sweet sister Moon, Water is coming. He just wants to make sure the house is big enough. Big enough? Big enough? Of course it's big enough. Did you not build me the largest, most magnificent house and compound in all the land? Yes, my love. I'm just telling you what Water said. Please don't hurt the messenger. And so they were having a party. The monkeys were swinging from chandeliers to chandeliers. The king of the lions was getting down as only the king of lions could do. I mean, everyone was having a great time. Even the otters. And you know, they otter have a good time. Oh, everyone was having a great time. And soon there was a rap at the door. Someone's knocking at the door. Do me a favor and let them in. Okay, I can't pay for the royalties for that. That's all you get. So Moon opened the door and there was water. Ah, Sister Moon, I'm so glad you're here. I would love to come in, but are you sure that your compound, that your home is big enough to accommodate me and my entourage? She said, big enough? Big enough? Of course it's big enough. Just come on in here. The party is under full. Just come on in. And so water began to come in. And with water came the whales. And with water came the dolphins. I was going to make a dolphin joke, but I saw no purpose in that. And with water came the starfish. And with water came the okra, not the food, the animal. And with water came all the denizens of the seas, and they began to fill up the first floor. And as water came in, he said, Sister Moon, are you sure that your house is big enough? He said, big enough, big enough. Of course it's big enough. Just come on in, come on in. And water began to go in, and the first floor filled up, and the second floor filled up, and the third floor, I told you it was a huge house, filled up, the east wing, the west wing. And it began to fill and fill and fill. And people were now going up into the rafters in the attic. And water said, I'm not done yet. Are you sure that your house is big enough? And she said, yes, the house is big enough. Just come on in and join the party. And the kraken even came in, and the octopi and the squid. All the people to give an inkling of how deep the water was. And all of them began to come in. And the sides of the house began to bulge out and bulge and bulge. And water said, Sister Moon, you know, I can still leave. I haven't gotten even half of my entourage in. Are you sure that your house is big enough? And she said, yes, it's big enough. Stop asking me that. Of course it's big enough. It's big enough. Come on in. And water continued to come in, and the sides bulged out and bulged out. But Brother's son had the house so well built that instead of the sides cracking and everything escaping, it bowled back in, blew the roof off, and everybody and everything shot up into the sky, including ocean. And they just went up. Now, the great cats, the elephants, and the great apes were the first to fall back down. The wolves came back down along with the coyote and the foxes. And all the people began to come back down. But the lesser animals, the dogs and the cats, they didn't go up quite as far, and they came down first. And it rained cats and dogs for several days. Don't hurt the messenger. And all the other animals began to come back down, and ocean began to come back down, but sun and moon continued to go up into the sky until they got stuck. Sun was furious and embarrassed. Moon was embarrassed and furious, but more embarrassed. And after all the other animals had come back down to the land, water gathered up his clan and went back to where he resides. And the other animals, 2 by 2, 4 by 4, 6 by 6, 7 by 7, they all went back to their habitats, their natural habitats. But they're still talking about that party to this day. As for sun and moon, they were so embarrassed that they did not come back out of the sky. Moon was so embarrassed, instead of blushing, she became a ghost of her former self. And sun was so embarrassed, but he tried to console moon because after all, he was a loving and dutiful son. But she was so embarrassed, she wasn't having it. And she was so embarrassed, she did not want the people to see her during the day. And sun keeps pursuing her, trying to convince her it's okay, that all has been forgiven. But moon is not having it, so deep is her embarrassment and shame. So sun spends the day beaming over the world, reminding him that all is well and trying to catch up with his beloved wife, Moon. But Moon, in her shame and embarrassment, hunkers in the night sky and refuses to be consoled. Now, there are many morals to this story. One could say what goes up comes down. And one could say it's not the size that matters. We're talking about houses. It's not the size that matters, but how you utilize what you have. And some people would say, be thankful for what you got before you lose it and you have not. And that's the story of why sun and the moon live in the sky. Asante.
Thank you very much, Baba. That's absolutely lovely. Another good story, well told. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we're going over to David Thompson. You need to unmute yourself.
There we are.
Right. Sorry, David, just before you start, Despina. Hello?
That's Despina. Hi.
Despina, are you going to tell a story later?
If you'd like, sure.
Absolutely, I would like. I'll sort out an order and I'll get back to you. But absolutely,
Okay.
John, you're going to be last, okay? John,
Thank
Rowe,
you.
you're last. Okay, over to you, David.
Okay, thank you. Well, I've been thinking about which story to tell, and I'm going to tell one I've told before. Some of you have heard it, and some of you haven't. And, well, you know, that's how stories go. Now, this story I'm going to tell you is from Texas Folklore. I live in Texas, as you can tell, TX, David Thompson. And we have a lot of interesting heroes and a lot of interesting folk people. So the story I'm going to tell you today is Bigfoot Wallace and the Hickory Nuts. Now, we have to realize Bigfoot Wallace was a real person. And as we have heroes and heroines, there are stories and legends that are built up around them. And this is one of them. This is Bigfoot Wallace and the Hickory Nuts. And I'm telling it in a Southern accent. So you got to listen real closely. All right, here we go. Well, let me tell you, friends, oh my word, I got to tell you about Bigfoot Wallace. He was just an amazing man. He was one of the heroes of the Alamo, that sacred Texas shrine to freedom. And somehow, some way, he got out. He didn't get executed like the rest of them. So he went on. And Texas became an independent country. Did you know that? You probably did, but if you didn't, now you know. Anyway, so Bigfoot, he decided he was going to raise horses. And oh, honey, he had some wonderful, wonderful horses. He had Palominis, and he had Arabians, and he had a lot of other kinds, but I don't remember the type of horses they are because I don't ride horses. But anyway, he was really happy with his horses. And his best horse, his own, he kept separately in a different corral, while the other horses were all kept in a large corral. Now, you got to realize that during this time, there were some, shall we say, raids upon people who raised cattle and horses, and a lot of it was done by the Comanches. Well, the thing is, in the Comanches and a lot of the Native American type of traditions, you have what's called a rite of passage for the young men. Well, word done got out that Bigfoot Wallace had the most beautiful horses. He must have had like 40 of them. I don't know. I didn't count them, but that's what I was told. Anyway, so Bigfoot and his wife go to bed and they's asleeping. And at that time, this band of Comanches come sneaking up to the corral and they slowly lift the logs out from the gate and they open up the gate and they shoo the horses out, all 40 of them. And the dogs are barking and the horses are just making noise and there's a whooping and a hollering, and Bigfoot wakes up and he says, oh my word, they done it again. They done come and got my horses. I gotta go get some back. Well, his wife said, you better be careful. You know they got bows and arrows and they'll shoot you before they look at you. She said, don't worry, honey. I know what I'm doing. So he goes and he gets his own horse, a beautiful Arabian, oh, lovely, lovely horse, the one he kept in a separate corral. And he gets out and he walks the horse and he looks and he sees all the tracks and all the horse. He says he knows where to go. So he goes out and he's just a following and he's just, I got to get those horses back before those Comanches get them. I got to get them back, got to get them back. And all of a sudden he comes over a rise, and all of a sudden he sees in the distance some fire and some smoke. He said, that must be where they is. So he slowed down. He got off in his horse, and he walked the horse over, and they looked over, and sure enough, there were the 40 horses plus the horses of the Comanches, and oh dear, they was to eat one of the little horses that they killed for have something to eat. Oh, well, I'm going to have to get another one. Okay. But how's he going to get them back? There's one of him and 20 of them. What he decides to do is he looks around and he sees he's in a hickory nut grove. And hickory nuts, if you don't know about them, they're hard to crack. And they're really, really hard. So he ties the cuffs of his shirts, both sleeves. He ties the cuffs on both legs. And he goes over and he grabs hickory nuts and he starts pushing them down down his legs on the inside. He pushes them on up. And then he pushes them down the back too. So he looks like what we would call a Michelin man. And he's just there. He's going to go get his horses. So he comes waltzing away, looking like there's some giant swaddling porcupine just walking towards the Indians. And he goes, I want my horses. I want my horses. And they look up and go, oh my God. They probably thought it was some strange desert demon coming up. They pull out their bows and arrows. Bing, 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 bing. And he just keeps on walking. He's, I want my horses back. Bing, 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 bing. And he just keeps on walking. And they go, oh, those Indians, those Comanches, they get up, they done hightail it away, leaving everything. Their horses, they leaving the fire, they're leaving everything. So Bigfoot gets over and he sees they're all gone. Okay. All right, it worked. Now they're my horses. Oh, I got some more horses. I got the Comanche horses. Okie dokers. So he unties the cuffs. He unties the cuffs of his pants. He pulls out his shirt, and those hickory nuts done fall out. And guess what? They was shelled and split in half. And he looked at them, and he looked at the horses, and he looked at, well, the hide of that small horse that they were cooking. These nuts will make good for the hogs, and they also make some good fertilizer. So he gathers them all back up and puts them all in that skin. He ties that skin up. He rounds up all his horses. They know him. And the other horses lead the Comanche horses, and they go back to Bigfoot's ranch. He puts them all in the corral. He takes the hickory nuts and he puts them into the hog wallers. He puts his horse up. He goes back into the house, gets on his nightshirt after he washed his face and his hands like he's supposed to. And his wife says, well, honey, did you have any trouble? And he said, honey, I got the horses back.
Well, sometimes you hear some proper authentic stories from Texas, and I think that was just one of them. Thank you very much. Right, so we're going to go to Mike next, and after Mike, Norman, if that's okay. Then Despinia? So how do you pronounce your name?
That's Despina.
Despina. Would you go third then? So we go Mike, Norman, Despina. And which part of the world are you from?
I'm from Greece.
From Greece. Okay. So Mike next, then Norman, and then Despina from Greece. Okay, Mike.
Right then. This is a story I'm in the process of stealing from the Hedge Sisters, so I don't have it down pat yet. In the beginning, the very beginning, the world was just water rolling and rolling and rolling around. Nothing but water. There was no land, just water. And in the water, the mother of the sea mother, decided just water wasn't enough. And she created life in the water. She created great forests of kelp and the fishes. That was a sign for a fish. And whales, not the country, that's not yet. And all sorts of sea plants, creatures, animals, coral, lobsters, selkies, but they were only seals at this time. And she was happy for a time. But then she decided she'd done all the life she could do in the sea. That wasn't enough. She wanted more. So she thought, and she reached down into the ocean depths, down to the seabed, and she pulled up land, and she reached down, 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 and she pulled up land, and she pulled land out of the water. She pulled all the chemicals and pushed them together, and she built Orkney. Bless you, Mike.
Sorry, mate.
And she created Orkney and Shetland and the Hebrides. And then she started looking at her lands and thinking, that's good. And then she thought, it needs a bit of life. And so she started, and she created grasses, and she created heather, she created sedge. I don't know what she didn't create. And she thought, that's good. And then she thought, it needs animals. And so she created conies, and she created land animals for the Orkneys. This is where not knowing what land animals are is an issue. And she looked on it, and she was good, and she spent months working on it and keeping them and making the climate good for them. And she loved it. She was able to come in and out of the sea. For the first time ever, she felt the warmth of the sun on her when she was on land. And she was just really happy. But gradually, all this pouring of her strength into creation weakened her and weakened her. And her arch nemesis, Terran, just the opposite of her. Where she loved warmth, he loved cold. Where she loved life, he loved death. Ice was his natural element. He gradually thought, she's looking weak. I'll have a go at this. And he came forth and he fought her. And they fought in the water, and he tried to destroy her and he couldn't, but he managed to force her onto the land, and he sort of through storms and through the gales and snow and ice to try and destroy the sea mother and the land that she'd created. And she sheltered in a freshwater lake and gradually gained her strength back while he was expanding all his strength, trying to destroy her and trying to destroy the land and failing. He was stronger than her, but not strong enough. Now, over a period of months, she gradually got her strength back, and he gradually wore himself down. And eventually she felt up to it, and she jumped back into the sea, and she fought Terran directly, and there were storms away from the land. And eventually she got him tied up with ropes of kelp. And he lay on the seabed, and she went back onto the land and started mending the damage that he had done. She started restoring the grasses, restoring the plants, restoring the life and sheltering them and bringing forth the great climate, that climate that you get in Orkney in the summer. Kath can probably tell you. And it was all good. But of course, she started weakening again. And there are terms that they use in Orkney, which I don't know yet. One's Vor Tully and the other's Gorvelli. And in the autumn, you have the autumn storms as Terran once again rose up and fought her. And year after year, the two of them have fought, and neither can win. And so I guess it'll just keep on going. That's it.
Thank you very much, Mike. That's lovely to hear the stories from the Highlands and the Islands, the Orkney and the Shetland. I think we've got another one coming from Diana just in a moment, but I'm not going to put words in her mouth because she can just choose whichever story she comes. But I know you come from the Highlands. So we'll go to Norma next. Before we go any further, I have a Phil McBain that I can see on my screen, but I can't. I've been sending you messages. You obviously haven't been seeing them. Where are you from, and are you going to tell a story tonight?
Yeah, I'm from Scotland, and yes, I can tell you a story if you want, Mike.
I'd be very grateful if you would. Can you go on after Diana, please?
No problem.
Okay, so the order's now going to be, we're going to Norman, Despina. Then we go to Diana, and from Diana to Phil. Okay, Norman, my friend.
Hello, thank you, Mike. And I have to say thank you to Baba C for this story. I was feeling very low energy, still am, but the story you told, Baba, was inspired this. It's a short story, but you'll figure out what the connection is. There was a father, a wealthy man, and he had 3 sons. And he wanted to find out which of the best sons would be there to rule, to take care of his business. And so he gave a chest of gold to each of the sons. And he gave them this challenge, that they were to build the best and the biggest house with the gold that he gave them. Well, the first 2 sons, and I won't say whether the oldest or the youngest, whatever, there were 3 sons. 2 of the sons started building immediately. One built in wood and gleaming wood hallway where the sun shone through on oak and sandalwood. It was a beautiful house, even at the very beginning. The second son built in stone, high and strong. And while the first 2 were building away, you heard the sound of hammers and saws and stone being broken. The third son went out and had a party, and then went to another household, and there was a party. And because he had lots of gold, he invited musicians and griots and storytellers and all kinds of entertainment. And the people sat and they ate and they drank, they shared stories. And then the son went on to another household. And so by the time he'd been to almost every household in the land, the 3 sons came together. The first house of wood was finished, the house of stone was done, and the third son came back with empty hands and a smile on his face. And the father listened to the 2 sons describe the magnificence of their homes. He saw the house of wood, and indeed it was beautiful, and a huge hall for feasting, etc. He said, "You have done well." And the second house, he looked, the one of stone, high and strong it was. He said, "You have done well, my son, as well." But for the third son, he said, "My son, to visit the house that you have built would take me days and days and days, for you see, yours is the biggest and the best, for there is not a single house or home in this land that the door is not open to you. And so, you are the one with the open hand and the generous heart and the sharing of stories and song. You have the biggest and the best house." Baba, that story's for you.
Thank you very much, Norman.
Mike, let me respond to him real quick. I'll keep it brief. Norman, your story reminded me of the Oba, the king and his 3 sons, and which one would become Oba after he joined the ancestors. So Asante Sana, my friend, thank you very much. I'll share that story with you at another time.
Best word. You sharing it, because I've got one as well that is very similar to that comes from the Highlands in Cumbria.
All right.
So I'll show you that one as well. So where's my list? Here we go. Right. Now then, I'm terrible, Despina, for getting people's names wrong. So you're going to have to correct me rightly. So Despina. Sorry?
Despina.
Despina. I'm bound to get it wrong. Okay. Anyway,
okay.
Despina comes from Greece, and I think it's the first time here, but I'm looking forward to this. Here we go.
Well, I've been a visitor to the site. I've heard lots of stories, and thank you for that. Yeah, this is the first time I will be sharing one. So if you like, I can give one from my tradition, from Greek mythology.
Absolutely. And we have an open hand here, so anything goes, but Greek mythology, absolutely. And don't be late in a fortnight's time.
Okay, perfect. So let's see. Zeus had asked the great god Hephaestus, which would be volcano in Latin, to build for him a great big hound that could never lose prey. So Hephaestus, the metalsmith of the gods, created the beast. And indeed, it was huge and ferocious, and it was the best hound ever. Now, Zeus had a thing for mortal ladies, among others, and one of his soon-to-be mistresses was Europe. Now, this was a lass back then, just a normal girl who was out in the field playing with her friends when Zeus really wanted to approach her, but didn't know how to do that. So he transformed into a great big bull and just sat there in the field and waited for her to go close to him. And then all of a sudden she rode the bull. So the bull running, and in the end it started galloping with Europe on its back. And Europe was scared, but she couldn't jump off the bull because she was afraid for her life. So the bull took her all the way to Crete, to the place where he had been born, actually. And there the two lovers came to be. And from their union, there were 3 sons. Well, Zeus wasn't the best of companions because after a while he grew tired of living among mortals and he decided to go back to Mount Olympus. So there he left Europe with her sons, and she found solace into the arms of the king of Crete, who took her for his queen and adopted her sons. Now her eldest son, the son of Zeus, was the great and very famous King Minos. While Zeus was courting Europe, he had given her this hound as a gift. And when Minos became king, as a gift from his coronation, he got the great big hound from his mother. This dog was named Lelaps, or in modern Greek, Lelapa. Now, this word is still used today for great big storms or the fury of the wind. So you can imagine how great a beast that was. It came to the hands of King Minos then. And during his reign, he had a very serious problem. He could not produce an heir. He couldn't have kids. He had a disease that prevented him from doing so. The goddess of the king of Athens, of King Erechtheus, whose name is Procris, visited Crete, and she gave this herbal medicine to King Minos and cured him from that disease. So to thank her, he gave her the dog along with a spear that was also made by a target. So Procris was a good huntress herself, and you can imagine what accomplishments she must have made because of the spear and the hound, right? So Procris had the spear and the hound until she got married to Kephalos, who was a prince from Kephallonia. Now, Kephalos and Procris were very much in love. They would go hunting together very often. Along with the hound and the spear, they were the best hunters ever. The spear would always find its target, and Lelaps would always catch its prey. But a goddess, Eos, who in Latin is Aurora, really liked that guy, Kephalos. She really liked the prince, and she started flirting with him, but he was too much in love with his wife to say yes, and he would find ways to avoid her. But she kept insisting she was a goddess after all. And finally, she chased him all the way to Syria, where she made him hers. Now, they even had a son together, but he was always in love with his wife. He never wanted this. It was not his choice. He wanted to go back to Procris. He also thought that since he was so much in love and so sure of his wife's faith, he should put her to the test. So she convinced him to transform into a foreigner and present himself to his wife, and thus test her faith. And so he did. He went back to Athens and he started courting Procris. Transformed, she could not tell who he was, right? And at first she would deny him, but he kept offering gifts, golden ware and such. She was a princess after all. And finally, with this and that, he managed to convince her. On one day, she accepted him at night into her chambers. And when he finally did that, he uncovered his disguise and proved to be her forever husband. And so the couple had a huge fight, of course, right? He would accuse her for being unfaithful, and she would say that after 8 years you were away with yours, now you blame me and such. Anyway, they had a huge fight, but Artemis intervened and reconciliated the couple, so they were back together. She even gave him the dog and the spear as a gift for their reunion. But she was never too sure for his faith. So when he started going on hunting trips alone more and more often, she became worried, she became weary, and she asked his servant, the one who always accompanied him into his hunting trips, if there was somebody else. And the servant said that he didn't know, but that on occasion he had heard him call out a name that was Nepheli. This is a female name in Greek, but it also means the clouds. So what in reality was happening was that Kephalos was very, could not stand the heat of the day and the hot sun, and he would call out for the clouds to gather so he could have some shadow while hunting. But of course, this we know now, Procris didn't. So she wanted to find out for herself what was really going on. So she secretly followed him during the hunt and hid behind some bushes. So when she heard her husband call out the name Nepheli, she tried to peer through the bush and see for herself. Now, the hunting instincts of Kephalos, as soon as he saw the bush moving, he was certain there was game inside. So without thinking twice, he just threw his spear. And as we know from the beginning, the spear would never lose its target. So it went through the body of Procris. When Kephalos realized it was his wife he had killed, he cried in regret, but it was too late. Now he had to redeem for the crime, even though it was not willingly. He had to do something to save himself, or he would be exiled from Athens forever. So there was this oracle in Thebes that could set him free from guilt, but he had to do something for them. The people in Thebes had done something to offend the gods, and as punishment, a great big fox was sent to them who would devastate the place and kill all their animals. And this fox by the gods, and it was a beast that would never get caught. So they said that they would release him from the crime if he was to help them with his hound. And so he did. He released Lelapa, the great big hound, in chase of the fox. and the fox was never to be caught, and the hound was never to lose prey. As you realize, this was an eternal hunt. It would never stop. So the gods took pity on the two beasts. They were there of their making after all. So Zeus turned them into stone, and sometime later, he turned them into stars, which we can still see in the sky today. So the great big hound, the Lelaps, is Canis Major, and the fox is Canis Minor.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That was absolutely lovely, and thank you very much. That was absolutely great. Right, just before we go to Diana and then to Phil, Susan from South Africa, I'm presuming you are listening again today, but not doing anything yourself? Right, that's fine. Okay, so we go to the Highlands of Scotland, where a friend of mine, Stanley Robinson, always used to say that all the women who are born in the Highlands are absolutely beautiful. They are beautiful inside and they are beautiful outside, and together they are gorgeous, but sometimes only just beautiful.
Okay, here we go. I've heard John Rowe tell this story, but his version was different to mine. I'm not sure if there's a few versions, but the one I'm going to tell you
He would have got it wrong. Don't worry, he'd have got it wrong.
It's from Duncan Williamson, whom I've never met, but I keep up with Linda on Facebook because she used to send a lot of his stories through during the COVID period, and I've branched out since then.
Well, right, Duncan was an old friend of mine. So.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. There was once a king who lived a long time ago. He was a very powerful king, and he was a very good king. He did look out for his people. But as happens to us all, he was getting that bit older. And he realized he had to try and take care of the future. And he had 3 daughters. He didn't have any sons, but he had 3 daughters. He had Camellia, he had Bridget, and he also had the youngest, Marianne. And he'd been thinking to himself, how am I going to find out which one should succeed me as queen? Which one would be the most true to the way that is best for the people? Which one would be the most honest? Which one would be the most virtuous? And he thought and he thought. And then he decided to summon them after dinner. And he did. And they stood in front of them. And they were all dressed up, and they wondered why they'd been summoned, but they just weren't sure at all. This was their father, but he was also the king. And then he said that he was thinking about when he was no longer king. And they were all saying, Father, Father, no, we want you to keep going as king. But of course, he couldn't keep going forever. And once they'd calmed down, he said to them that he had a question to ask each, the same question. So he started with Camellia, the eldest, and she stepped forward and he said, Camellia, how much do you love me? And she thought, and then she said, Father, Father, I love you more than all the jewels, all the sapphires and emeralds and sapphires and diamonds and rubies in all the world. And he was very pleased. He smiled and he stood back. And then he moved along, and then it was Bridget. And he said to Bridget, Bridget, how much do you love me? And well, Bridget said, Father, I love you more than all the gold in all the land, not just this land, but all the lands. And again, he was very pleased. And he smiled, and he moved on. And here was Marianne, the youngest, and the one that resembled his wife the most. And his wife, the queen, had died several years earlier. And well, it had been such a terrible time, but they'd got through it all. But it was hard for the king to look at Marianne sometimes because she so resembled her mother, and that brought back so much heartache to him. But he said to Marianne, Marianne, how much do you love me? Now, she'd had that little bit longer to think about her answer. She wanted to be honest. She wanted to say something from the heart that would really make him stand up and take notice. So she said, Father, Father, I love you. I love you more than salt. And when she said that, he thought he hadn't heard properly. He rubbed his ears and said, you love me more than salt? Your sisters love me more than all the jewels and all the gold and all the land. And you love me more than salt? Salt is worthless. Salt is nothing. You are banished, Marianne. You must go. She could stay in her room that night, but the next day she had to go. And she was so bewildered. This was her father. She loved him. Why did he not understand that? Well, he was the king. He had to be obeyed. And of course, she didn't sleep that night. She got up early and she packed a bag. The cook, whom she was friendly with, gave her some water, an apple, and some cheese. And then, once Marianne had dressed and got a few possessions in her backpack, she had to go. But where was she going to go? This was the only life that she knew. This was the castle. Her sisters were here, her father, the cook, the gardener. She'd grown up here. She didn't know anything about the outside world. She was quite naive, but yet her father said she had to go. And go she must. And she set off on her way. She waved to the cook and the gardener, and they were so distraught, but they couldn't do anything about it either. She just had to go. And she walked along, and she remembered this song that her father used to sing to her when she was small. Golden hair and heart of gold, though you are not so very old, you are my treasure and my joy. You are my treasure and my joy. But you know, it didn't make her feel any better hearing that song. In fact, it made her feel more sad, because that was a time when she'd been so close to her dad. But there was no point in just thinking about all the sad things. She went on her way. And she came to a fork in the road, and she wasn't sure if she should just carry straight on or take the fork. But well, she had to go somewhere, so she took the fork. And it took her through a wood, and it took her through a pathway that had high hedges on either side. And when she got to the end, there was a clearing. And the clearing, well, in it was this little cottage. And this little cottage had some stones and a little garden type area in the front of the cottage. And it looked reasonably well kept. And she was getting tired, and she'd already had some water and an apple and cheese. And well, she had to try. And she hoped and prayed that whoever answered the door would be kind. So she knocked. She thought there's bound to be someone in, because she saw someone's smoke coming out the chimney. And the door opened. And this old lady, well, she had white hair with grey in it, answered the door. And she says, matey me, lassie, what are you doing this way? Nobody normally stops here. Oh, are you lost? What's happened to you? Well, Marianne was quite taken aback. But she just finally managed to get the words out. She said, my father the king, he's banished me. And well, this old lady, Maggie, she was quite surprised, but she said to her, come in, lassie, come in. And there was a fire going. So she sat down beside the fire, and there was this beautiful, sleek cat, jet black. And it was by the fire. And it seemed to cozy up to Marianne. And apparently it didn't do that very often. And so Marianne related the tale about what had happened and how she was banished. And she really didn't know what to do. She was tired. She hadn't eaten. So Maggie got her something to eat, and she said, She didn't pass any judgment when she heard the story. She just thought to herself, that this king needed taught a lesson. Well, at least that was Maggie's view. But it came to bedtime, and so Marianne went through to her room. Well, it was called her room after that. It had a very makeshift bed in it and a side table. And best of all, this black cat came through and sat on her bed, and she was so delighted. It made her feel safe. And it had been such a terrible time for her. So then, in the morning, she got up and she helped Maggie to gather some sticks and some herbs for cooking. And so it carried on. They gradually got to know each other, and Maggie seemed fine with helping her out. She could tell how distraught the young girl was when she first arrived. But what Marianne didn't know was that Maggie was a bit more than she realized. Maggie was a white witch. And she was capable of quite a lot of magic, but she didn't readily tell people that, of course. But anyway, their friendship developed. And this had gone on for quite some time. And then one day, Maggie said to Marianne, "I'm going to miss you tomorrow, Marianne." And Marianne said, "But why are you going to miss me? Why are you going to miss me? I'll be here. I don't understand." And Maggie sat her down and said to her, "I want you to go back to your father, the king." And as soon as she said those words, Marianne was going, "No, no, no, I can't go back. My father was so angry with me. He was so angry. I cannot go back. I can't face him." And Maggie said, "Sit down, my dear. He's not going to recognize you when you go back." And she explained about her dress, that it would have holes in it. And they cut her hair and they roughed it all up and they put soot and dirt on her face and on her legs. And she looked for all the world like a beggar child. And she even had her bare feet. And she said, "Also, Marianne, I am going to give you a bag of salt. So you will be wanted when you get to the castle. They will let you in." And there was something about the way Maggie was explaining all this that made Marianne feel that, yes, she had to do it. Maggie, after all, was a very kind-hearted person. And anyway, she really wanted to take the cat, but the cat had to stay with Maggie. But she decided, okay, this must be done. Because you see, back with the king, things were much different. The king, well, he wasn't very happy. And if the king's not happy, no one round about him is happy either, because he soon let you know. And that's just the way it was. What had happened was, thanks to Maggie and her powers, there was no salt to be had in the entire land. Even if someone came into that kingdom and they had salt with them, it would be taken away. It would be magicked away. And so the king had begun to realize about salt. For a start, he loved to have salt in his potatoes. He loved to have salt in his vegetables. He even used salt on water if he had a wound, and it was also used for curing meat. He began to realize what salt was all about. And it just didn't matter what the cook did in the kitchen. Nothing tasted the same. The vegetable stew, the soup, nothing was the same. And he was beginning to get really angry. And he couldn't find a substitute for the meat and that he loved. And the meat and the potatoes and everything else just was not the same without the salt. So off Marianne went. And as she walked along the path with the tall hedges and back through the forest, and she saw the castle, and she thought, her heart was pounding. This was her home. What was it going to be like? She was scared, she was worried, but she trusted in Maggie, and she thought, well, she had to do that. Sure enough, nobody would recognize her. Nobody would know it was Marianne. And when she came near, the guards saw her coming, and they said, "Away with you, beggar child. Away with you, beggar child. We don't want you here." And she said, oh, but I have a gift for the king. And what kind of gift would you have for the king? What kind of gift would you have for the king? And she said, but I have a bag of salt. And it was as if a light was turned on. And they ushered her forwards. And they said to the king, there's a lady here, a young girl, and she has something for you. It's. And they ushered her forward so that she could say for herself. And the king was very sullen. And the king said, yes, my dear, what could you possibly have? I have all the jewels in all the land. I have all the gold in all the land. What could you possibly give me that I would want, that I would cherish, that I would treasure? And she held up the bag of salt. And she said, I have a bag of salt. And the king, he rubbed his ears again. A bag of salt. You have salt. And he came over and she opened the bag and he put his finger in. And it was really salt. And he was overjoyed and almost unbelieving. It had been so long since he tasted it. And well, he said, now, my dear, what can I give you in return for your generosity? What can I give you? What gift would you like? And she said, Father, I love you more than salt. And he looked in her eyes and he could see it was Marianne. It was Marianne, and their eyes met and then they hugged because they'd both missed each other so much. And well, they had a reconciliation after that. But Marianne never forgot Maggie. She never forgot the cat. She never forgot her kindness, the kindness she'd been shown. But after that, she got to know her father that bit more. And he told her what he wanted for the land and what his plans were and all the history that lay behind it and what he felt would be beneficial for her to know because she was chosen to be the one to succeed him. He had misjudged her badly, but now they were back together. And so Marianne took over as queen. And that is the end of my story.
Oh. Well, Diana, you say that John Rowe tells that from Duncan, but I've got a sneaking suspicion that Duncan Williamson got that off a very old friend of my father's and my grandfather's called William Shakespeare.
Well, I've had a debate about that sometimes because some people thought there was an old story that Shakespeare got from someone, and changed it into King Lear, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's hundreds of versions of that. The one I do is a East Anglian version. But I used to tell stories up at the Norfolk Broads every week, and there was a family came, and they loved it. They loved Love You More Than Salt stories. So every week I had to find a new I Love You More Than Salt story from anywhere in the world. And I found from Czechoslovakia, from all over the place.
Yeah, I'll have to look up and check. Yeah, I've told a few stories to kids lately, and that's been one of them. And I've asked them afterwards what is their favourite, and they've all come out. Oh, it's the one with the king and the three daughters. It's I Love You More Than Salt, which is quite interesting. So,
there's a book that a fellow called Pat Ryan did. Now, Pat Ryan is he's got to be an Irishman because he said to me once, I asked him where he came from, and he said, I'm half English, half Irish, and half American. So he had to be Irish. But he wrote a book about where all the old stories came from, and that one's in it. It goes back to, they call them source stories sometimes.
Right.
And his Pat Ryan is the fellow to get hold of. He now lives in Belfast. He used to live down in London.
What's his last name? Sorry.
Patrick Ryan.
Ryan. Okay.
Right. Ryan.
Okay.
Okay. And I'll get hold of him and see if he's still got any copies. Right. Okay. Thank you very much, Diana. That's absolutely lovely. Thank you very much. Now we're going to Phil.
Yep. Hiya. I've got a wee story for you from a Durris farmer. Now, Durris is a bit of land between Astoney and Bankery, up in Scotland. And the farmer has gone to the mart, and he's fair proud of his beautiful black stallion. And the farmers are round about him at the mart, hear wee conversations and how grand a horse it was. And he just goes, aye, maybe it is, and maybe it's nae. And he gings away home. And a couple of weeks later, the stallion gings missing. When he gings to the mart the next day, the farmers are hear a conversation about him, going, oh, you must be awful disappointed that you've lost your stallion. And he just goes, maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong. A couple of weeks later, when he gings home, the stallion comes back, and he's brought a pal with him, an unbroken pony. And his son decides to and ride the pony and falls off it and breaks his leg. And when they're at the mart the next week, the farmers are here conversation about what's been going on, and he says, you must be awful disappointed that your loon's broken his leg. And he goes, maybe you're right and maybe you're wrong. And a couple of weeks later, war breaks out. And the local officials come to the farm to take his son away to join the army. But of course he can't join the army because he's broken his leg. And the next time he gings the mart, the farmers say to him, oh, you must be awful pleased that your son's not going away to the war because he's broken his leg. And he just goes, maybe.
Oh, that's lovely, Phil. Thank you very much.
Maybe, sorry. That was good.
Right. So, Phil, 2 weeks' time, don't be late. Dispinia, 2 weeks' time, don't be late.
Maybe.
Okay, we're going to finish off with John Rowe, who, and I think everybody's done something and wants to do something. It is now nearly 10 to 8, so we've been here for a good couple of hours. Simona and I have been talking to each other, so that's fine. So, John, you were going to finish off with a couple of poems, I think.
I was just going to do one poem, and
that's fine.
It's last weekend was Remembrance Day and Veterans Day for the Americans, and this is just called Veterans. They were all veterans. Anyone more than 2 years old when I, a bulge baby, came screaming into the world in my nan's front room. I remember the house in Essex Road in the backyard with its outside toilet and vegetable patch. I remember the house in Essex Road and my granddad, who found me looking for a policeman to show me across the road when I ran away from home at 3 years old. I was going to see my friend in Tilbury. I'd met him on the district line with my dad. He cracked a joke asking me what I was going to do when I retired. At that moment, we were passing a pile of tires on the dockside, and the words merged like the trains that met at the bottom of our cul-de-sac on their way to Barking Station. The steam trains ran at the bottom of our yard, and we stood in the alley waiting for them. Powered by electricity, the trains running on the other side of the road weren't half as interesting. There were bomb sites too, big gaping holes strewn with rubble and half-standing wall. I thought everywhere had bomb sites and had no idea of the carnage they represented, only that on Armistice Day I heard the salute from the big guns on the Thames, and we stood in silence for 2 minutes. I did know in that war there were no civilians. The evidence was everywhere. Gas masks and tin helmets, drawers full of medals from past conflicts and ration books. I remember the ration books. By my 16th birthday, I learned there were other wars, fought by those who chose or were cajoled into joining, and with each decade came new veterans, scarred beyond recognition, inside and out. And maybe because now most of us in the West are civilians, they become other, whether heroes or villains depended on the year. I've listened to their stories from Vietnam to Iraq. I've listened to them describe close shaves. This week, I heard how a man in a doorway watched his Oppo. As his Oppo caught the bullet, it got lodged in his buckle and caused no injury. He still has it. Superstition, I suppose, was the teller's closing line, making sure there was no hint of bravado. Before his father came down to save him, my relative lay in his room in the prosperous South, afraid to ask for a carer in case they billed him again for his war pension and more. He led his men away from an ambush in the desert, saved them, and ended up a cripple. Folks doing a job, I say. And like all industrial injuries, they deserve to be looked after by those who own the machinery. There are heroes in every walk of life. Folks doing a job. My cousin was a fireman, another service. He came out almost unscathed. Another man doing his daily work. Cold, I know, but mine was a service family and armaments were my father's trade. Just folks doing their job in extreme circumstances. Maybe if we were all veterans, we would understand that and reserve words like heroes or villain for individuals when we know what they actually did. Meanwhile, I listen to stories from those who carry images inside their heads of broken bodies and fallen comrades, and places where it's impossible to tell who the enemy was from those who could bear it no longer because they could not differentiate between those who gave the orders and those they were ordered to kill. I've sat in a front room in Dresden as Lebanese men from a village that had been shelled from the sea thanked my friend who had been in the Air Force at the time for a line in the poem recording the incident. I didn't think anyone noticed, he said. In the Middle East, I talked to a man who had lost a brother in the civil war across the border. He spoke with a fatalism, seeing no end to the conflict. We asked him what he thought would happen. Ask me in a year, he said. After the Falklands, I met men in prison who could not survive outside the ordered life of the army, and men who grew their hair and went on the road, not because they were homeless, but because they needed to breathe the sweet air of freedom. One who, after a life of defusing bombs in Northern Ireland and beyond, was diffused himself with antidepressants and sedatives to stop him putting wives and neighbours through doors and plate glass windows. A friend who's conscripted and shipped out to Vietnam, where he joined the medical corps, was sent to the front line to pick up body parts just weeks before he was due to come home, and he's still trying to piece them together between clown shows. And a Kurdish violinist from the Baghdad Orchestra, who sat and rehearsed in his town square as Iranian aircraft dropped bombs around him, killing all his friends, who wrote songs so children could recognize landmines, who cooked for the Americans who ran the charity until the day he was told to poison them, who ran away to stop himself becoming a killer and survived it all, but broke as he traveled 6 days in a wooden box in a ship's hold before being abandoned in Dover to the life of an asylum seeker, and one who did not break, but escaped from police custody in Sudan because he noticed those who went in never came out. All folks surviving the extremes, almost, while most of us simply slept.
Thank you very much, John. You write powerful poetry sometimes, John. You really do. Right.
Thanks, Mike.
Right, it's been a lovely evening. It's nearly 2 hours, and those 2 hours.
Well, I better do the parish notices then.
Parish notices. Sorry, mate. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. So Tuesday we've got we have our young international tellers at 5 o'clock UK time, as always on a Tuesday evening, and then on Friday we've got Dawn Ellis telling stories for children, and that would be fantastic. So that's all I'm going on. About 2 weeks' time, of course, Mike will be back with
we're doing it all again.
So we'll see you all again.
And it's and worldwide it certainly is again. And thank you very much for everybody who's come and done something, and even more so to the ones who've just come and listened, because that's just as important as anything else. If it wasn't for the people that came and listened, we wouldn't be able to do all this stuff. So thank you very much to those. I'll be here in a fortnight's time, like I always am. Goodbye, goodbye, goodbye.
Goodbye, and thank you, Mike, as always. And thank you, Ollie, for driving the magic car.
Absolutely a pleasure. Simone, I can see you for the first time. I've seen you. I'm sorry. 2 weeks' time. Okay. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Until the next time, to be continued.
Till the next time.
Absolutely brilliant. Oh, John Rowe, I sent you a request last time. I think I sent you an email. I need that letter.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I'll deal with that.
Yeah, because I want to see about getting my council person and some agencies in the DC government to sponsor me, or at least do something. you know, we have some agencies.
Okay, I'm doing admin for the next 3 days. So
okay,
if you haven't got it by Wednesday, come over the Atlantic and give me a slap.
The last time I walked across the Atlantic, it was cold and wet. No, but
okay,
I'll get a slap to you.
Okay, see
all
you
right.
then.
Take care. Peace. Thank you, Ali.
Thank you, John Barofiki. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Sakitu. You're welcome.
Okay, I'm going. Bye.
Bye. Until next time.
Hold on. Hold on.